Okay, Paul, you'll just need to unmute, please. You're not unmuted yet, Paul.
Okay, now then.
Okay, yep, you're good.
All right, thank you. Need to begin, ladies and gentlemen, with the news that one of our long-term participants passed to the next dimension last night. And for us to lose Spencer Brown as part of our body of participants who's been with us for years is it's one of those notable things that we all apparently get to experience that transition at some point. But for those of us left behind, it oftentimes is a painful thing. And so I would ask for your prayers for the Brown family. Um, it's tough adjustment, as I've been 2 years now trying to adjust to Rena having passed to the next dimension. It's a tough adjustment, and all kinds of interesting little triggers come up to make it so that you have tears at the most inappropriate and unexpected times and places. And yet, you also have those joys that come back in the reflection upon the marvelous experiences that we got to share together. And Spencer Brown was one of those people who didn't speak very much, but he came so regularly and was a strong advocate for the Book of Mormon. And so I'm very pleased to have had him as part of our contingent for the last at least 4 years. This evening, we welcome you all. This evening, it is my pleasure to introduce Rod Meldrum. He has been with us once previously, and he is an advocate for the Heartland theory for the geography of the Book of Mormon. He did stick a note in a couple of weeks ago when we had a presentation on the Hilcamore in Mexico, and his insertion was that there's really only one Hilcamore, and that's in New York. And so tonight he gets to speak on that at least a little bit. But I asked for him. I didn't ask for him to speak on that topic. I asked him to deal with another topic that I thought would be of special interest, and that is the overall picture of the prophecies and the promises of the promised land. And so I'm sure it'll be a treat for you. He is a researcher, author, and lecturer on the national scale. I don't know if he's still taking the annual tour across the country with a bunch of people, but he came several years to Nauvoo with a group of people, and he would let me speak to them, even though clearly my viewpoints and his were quite in contrast. But he dug with me a couple of mornings, and so he'll make his appearance this evening wearing an I Dig Nauvoo shirt. So that's an indication of his fundamental loyalty to our overall cause. He is a lecturer on the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon, its historical efficacy, and the scriptural and physical evidences. His research supports the writings and teachings of ancient and latter-day prophets and indicates North America as the location where this history played out. He and his wife Tanya are the parents of 4 children. He began his study of issues surrounding the controversy over DNA in the Book of Mormon in 2003, which led to a questioning of the origins of the proposed setting of the Book of Mormon in Mexico. And then he has done study on the Book of Mormon itself and the historical background and documents associated with it. And so I want to welcome Rod back and all of the returning participants. And I recognize that while I've cited Spencer Brown, and I haven't necessarily been able to cite other people when they pass, certainly not that quickly, but much rather you stay with us rather than have me cite you as having passed to the next dimension. I very much appreciate the returning participants, and we have a good cluster tonight. Thank you all for coming and participating. I understand from Rod that he would prefer to give his presentation and then have the question and answers and comments afterwards. So if you'll defer to that, welcome back, Rod, and all participants as well. I will Stop the share. No, no, wait a minute. I can't do that. I've got to get the prayer in there first. Whoop, excuse me. Let's go. Yeah, let's pray together. Cosmic soul, source of the great prophecies that we have a destiny of peace. We bow in respect, for we struggle to cause our personal, religious, and national conflicts to cease. Yet we are compelled, as we read the potential of the promised land, to see in the mystery of history the movement of your hand, wherein people of faith, focused upon the hope for fulfillment of deeply motivated dreams, are and have been able to cross the mountains, the oceans, the deserts, and build homes along peaceful streams. This evening, Lord, in gratitude we bow, respecting freedom to gather on Zoom to discuss, to affably disagree perhaps, yet we avow to treat each other with respect, to look again and again at alternative views, to seek the facts, the stories that instruct, the archaeological evidence underlying basic truths. And we are here to thank you for your beautiful promises that by living our lives doing good, that we can avoid negative consequences, and by learning, embodying the lessons of your Son, the Prince of Peace, we ultimately can and will cause our murmurings and our conflicts to cease. So we pray for that outcome in the name of that Prince, Jesus, and his source. Amen.
Amen. Fantastic.
Let me click that one out and get off the share. Hi, where's my...
Well, Paul, before you jump off,
Yes?
quick question. I'm not sure which one I should. I was kind of prepared to do a presentation involving DNA and the Book of Mormon, but I can talk about the prophecies and promises too. I just need to pull up a different one. I've got
Well,
I've got like 85 presentations. I just have to pick which one it's going to be.
you gave me, I think, 10 to choose from. And so this is the one that Robert Cook's been advertising for us on the prophecies. So that's the
On
one.
the prophecies?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what I've been advocating for you. Um,
Okay.
I clearly allow you some latitude because authors should be entitled to some latitude to talk about what they want to talk about.
Well,
And,
I
and
appreciate that, but I didn't know that this was I was thinking that we were going to be talking about DNA stuff, but I am perfectly happy to talk about a different thing if you'd like.
well, let me intrude just a moment because um,
Just give me a second to pull it up and I'll
yeah,
get it
while
there.
you're working on that,
Okay.
next week I am turning our discussion into a discussion of the Book of Mormon bicentennial. The Lamoni Historical Association has has proposed to host the bicentennial of the Book of Mormon celebration at Lamoni, Iowa, one of the few places that has a Book of Mormon in 2030. And so the question of what should be included and how do we proceed to exclude? Um, what are the frameworks, the contours, the topics, the issues that need to be addressed or not addressed? And so this group, having participated for 5 years with me on the forum, is a primary resource for us to plan and prepare for that event. And so I have chosen to put that topic before this group next week and encourage all of you to consider yourselves part of the steering committee if you want to help make the decisions about just how we do celebrate this fantastic book that's been around for 200 years. Okay, Blair has a hand up.
You hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. If you're not going to talk about DNA, tonight, I would like for you to come back soon and do so.
You bet. I'd be happy to.
Okay, put him on the
Let me
list.
see.
Thank you.
Let's see. I want to get to. Let's see. I want to make sure I've got the right ones here. No, that's not the one here. I am sorry. I was just. Let's see here. Hinterlands.
Since if you already had the DNA booted up and here you have Blair's specific request, we can shuffle.
Do you want to shuffle? It's up to you.
It certainly it appears that it would save us a bit of time.
Well, I'm just going to get some things involving
Oh, and for
John
myself,
Smith here.
knowing that I'm thinking in advance of and preparing for a presentation means that I will have more on one topic that I prepared for than one that I am having to pull up out of the
All right. I think
the
this will be fine.
okay.
I mean, I'm able to do any one of them at any particular point in time, so that's not a big deal. All
Oh,
right, should we go ahead and share the screen then?
yes, go
Yep,
to
go
the
ahead.
Okay, give me 1 second here, and I'll pull that one up here.
Let me
So,
greet Phyllis Weaver, Gary Whiting, um, see John
Wednesday's
Stallworth,
here.
and Wednesday Jones. Yes.
Ron Smith and
Oh,
Phil.
oh yeah, there's Ron.
good group here.
Val. Yes, you've got a cross section of restoration movement here tonight.
Fantastic. Okay, well, can you see this? Is that full screen or is that not full screen?
It's pretty much full screen. Where's the first record?
Yeah, I can go. That
Yep.
that should be full screen right there.
We can read it.
Yep, that's good.
Okay. All right. Well, we can kind of start off with this then, because I actually am taking a little bit of a tactic that was used in the Book of Mormon itself, where when they were introducing people to the gospel, they would start from the very beginning with Adam and Eve, the Garden of Eden, and so forth. And so I wanted to start off with this covenant information. Is We know that the Book of Mormon happened on a promised land. And so one of the questions that we have is, let's have a little discussion about promised lands in general. I was going to ask the question to the group, where is the first, meaning the earliest recorded land of promise in the scriptures? Where would that be? Where would you go to find it? Most people will say, well, we'd go to Genesis probably to try to find that. But actually, that would be the first incorrect answer. Okay. Let me see. Let's see if I can. There we go. So it actually is found in the Pearl of Great Price in Moses, chapter 6, verse 17. And it says that Enos, who was a grandson of Adam, he lived 90 years and he begat Canaan. Now, notice the spelling of Canaan here. It's Cainan. And Enos and the residue of the people of God came out of the land called Shulon and dwelt in a land of promise, which he called after his own son, whose name was Canaan. So the original land of promise was named after Adam's great grandson Canaan. One of the questions is where was this land of promise, and what is the promise that was associated with this land? And in Doctrine and Covenants, section 107, 53, it says that 3 years previous to the death of Adam, he called Seth, Enos, Canaan. So he's going down the list, patriarchally. Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, and Methuselah, who are all high priests, with the residue of his posterity who are righteous, into the valley of Adam-on-the-Yaman, and there bestowed upon them his last blessing. Okay, so this is 3 years before his death. So how old was Adam at this point in time? Well, I think if I understand right, he lived to be about 930 years old. So he's 927 years old at the time when he calls a special meeting. Now, this meeting is important because they had to physically be there so he could lay his hands upon their head and bestow the blessings upon them. And where was this? Where's this Adam on Yaman? Well, it's we have. If anybody's looking for a sign, here's our sign. Okay, okay. Anyway, so Joseph Smith received the revelation, and this is DNC 116. I'm sorry I didn't get these transferred over to to the the Community of Christ different sections and so forth. But I know that you guys know this well enough that you know where this is at. But basically, it says Spring Hill is named by the Lord Adamondiaman because that he is the place where Adam shall come to visit his people. And he says this is revelation given to Joseph Smith the prophet near White's Ferry at a place called Spring Hill, Daviess County, Missouri. That's from the history of the church. So this is the Canaan. This is where at least it appears to indicate that the Valley of Adamondiaman. And as far as I know, there's not been a two Adamondiaman theory proposed at this point in time. So I think we know that this is the one. Okay, so we have Adamondiaman here, and that was the first land of promise. And what was the promise? The promise is really simple. Basically, as long as the people are righteous, they get to stay here. But if the people ever become sufficiently wicked or sufficiently unrighteous, then God's going to remove them, or what I like to call it the broom treatment. He's going to sweep them off the land, this special land. So we get down through Adam's posterity, down to this gentleman here by the name of Noah. The people at this point in time had degraded sufficiently that God basically was going to have to invoke the judgment phase of this thing, of the promised land, and remove them from off this special land. And so we know what happened basically with Noah's flood. That's the case. Then Noah, where did he build his ark? Well, it kind of makes sense that he was here in America basically, where Adamondiaman is located. And so that's basically the general idea that I have is that Noah was here. He with all of the other posterity of Adam. It doesn't give any indication that they were moving, thousands of miles away to other continents and so forth. Prior to this, although it doesn't say that they didn't, so we don't really know one way or the other. But we do know at least that after 927 years, Adam and his posterity all came back together again at Adamondiaman, and there is when he gave him his blessing. So the flood basically happens, and we have Moses and his three sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Japheth was blessed that his seed would exceed all. Ham was married to Egyptus, who had the bloodline of Cain in her, and so they became basically the Hamites, if you will. And then you have Shem, who had the priesthood that was bestowed to him through Noah as well. So they basically went into these general areas, as you can see in that. If we follow that down several generations, I think it's 10 or 12 generations or maybe more, that we get down to this guy by the name of Abraham. And Abraham has a son by the name of Isaac, and I love this image, but it has something very wrong with it, and that is that Isaac was not a young lad at the time. And Abraham, but he submitted himself to his father, just like our Savior Jesus Christ submitted himself to his Father, and because of his unflinching righteousness and his commitment to follow God no matter what, and his obedience, Abraham was given a covenant. God made a covenant with Abraham, and that covenant it wasn't the first time that God made this kind of a covenant, but it was a very important one here. And the covenant is that as long as they are righteous, they get to stay on this land over here. Now Abraham was given a very special land, and now places matter. That's one of the reasons why I bring up this image of Jerusalem. I took this image a few years ago while I was there, and one of the things that struck me is you have three of the most powerful religions on the earth: the Muslims, the Christians, and the Jews. They all are willing to basically fight and die over who gets to own this piece of property, this Dome of the Rock area. And as I looked at that, I thought to myself, why would anybody fight and die over this, what looks like a pretty forsaken, forlorn land? I mean, it doesn't have any natural resources. It's not particularly beautiful. In fact, it's rather plain and kind of ugly. In some senses. So why would they be willing to fight and die over this land? And the answer comes because each one of those religions stem from Abraham, and they know about this covenant with God that God made with Abraham on this particular site. This was actually Mount Moriah, that Abraham went up to offer sacrifice with Isaac. And so each one of these religions really want to have a part and a place with this. So what exactly was this covenant that God made with Abraham? Well, he talks about a land, an inheritance. Basically, Abraham chapter 2, it talks about the land of the Canaanites, and to thy seed will I give this land. He says in Genesis chapter 13, lift up thine eyes, this is Abraham, and look from the place where thou art, north, south, east, and west. For all the land which thou seest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed for how long? Forever. And forever is how long? I mean, how long is that with God? So it's a long time, right? So you basically have an interesting thing. You have these two words, Canaan, are the same word phonetically, but they're spelled differently to differentiate between the original world Canaan and what I would say now would be the new world Canaan, but just to keep it simple here, we'll just call it the old world Canaan, Canaan. And these are the two lands that God promised first to Adam and Eve and their posterity, and then to Abraham. Now, this covenant with Abraham also included posterity, seed and descendants. Genesis 13 says, I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth. If a man can number the dust of the earth, then shall thy seed also be numbered. And of course, here's a few of them. Okay, so Abraham's seed is literally all over the earth. And in fact, I read an article once that said practically everyone on the earth living today has at least some DNA basically from Abraham. Now, this is the third thing, and I'm going to have you guess, what is this blessing? What is this special blessing of this covenant? In Leviticus chapter 26, then I will give you rain in due season, the land shall yield her increase, and the trees of the field shall yield their fruit. So what kind of a blessing is this? What blessings are these? These are blessings of prosperity, economic wealth, basically. You know, their flocks and their herds will prosper, and they're going to do really well with their orchards and their vineyards and so forth. God's going to prosper them basically. So there's their flocks and their herds and so forth. And the fourth aspect of this, the fourth blessing of this covenant, is security or protection. And that basically, he says in Leviticus, he says, I will give you peace in the land. You shall lie down, and none shall make you afraid. I'll get rid of all the evil beasts out of the land, and neither shall a sword go through your land. You shall chase your enemies, they shall fall before you by the sword. And if 5 of you shall chase 100, and 100 of you shall put 10,000 to flight. And your enemies shall fall before you by the sword. So he's basically, I like to call this the shield of protection, the iron dome, if you will, of protection that God places over the covenant nation, the covenant land, and the covenant people while they're on that land, so long as they are what? Righteous and obedient. So, quick question. Why does the Lord bless his righteous covenant people while they're on the promised lands with posterity, prosperity, and security? Does God not love all of his children? Does he love some children more? Of course, the answer to that is, of course, no. God loves all of his children equally. But it doesn't change the fact that God actually is giving these particular people special blessings that not everybody gets. And it's for a reason. And basically, it's this reason. This is the reason why. Genesis chapter 22, verse 18 says, in thy seed, Abraham, shall all of the nations of the earth be blessed. So basically, God has given Abraham a charge, if you will, that he's to use these special blessings that he and his posterity receive for the very purpose of taking the gospel message, basically, to all the nations of the earth. He says even the blessings of life eternal are part of that. If you read the script, the verse a little bit further down. So if you follow this down to the family of Abraham, you have Terah and Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, of course, has 12 sons. And those 12 sons basically divide up the sacred land of Canaan. Now, this land of Canaan was divided into, there's 12 tribes, and all of the different sons got a measure, if you will, or got a piece of real estate of this land of Canaan. except for two. There's two that didn't get one, that didn't get a piece of real estate here. Who were the two that didn't get them? Well, that was the Levites. They didn't get a piece of land because their inheritance ended up being the temples. So that their inheritance was the temple. And also Joseph. Now Joseph's two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, they both got an inheritance. And you can see that on this map here, Ephraim and Manasseh in the middle on the left-hand side. They both got an inheritance. So some people say, well, Joseph kind of got a double helping, a double inheritance. But as it turns out, Joseph, I often wondered about that. Why didn't Joseph get a piece of land when they were dividing up this land of Canaan? When I thought he was the good one, right? I thought he was the one that received the coat of many colors and translated dreams and saved his family and so forth, right? And all of Egypt in the process. But he didn't get an inheritance. And it turns out that he didn't get an inheritance because his land was to be a land above all other lands, a much better land, a better land of promise. Now, if we still just kind of follow along with what's going on over here in the land of Canaan, eventually the northern tribes and the southern tribes have a rift. They just like a lot of brothers and so forth, they can't seem to get along. So they have a rift. They split into the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Israel. And the northern kingdom of Israel, they are losing their grip on the iron rod, if you will. And so they begin to fall away from God. So God basically has to remove that iron dome, that shield of protection that is protecting their lands. And he allows the Assyrian Empire, the Assyrians, to come in around 722 BC and attack the northern kingdom of Israel. Now, at first, the northern kingdom of Israel were able to actually repel them and drive them back out of their lands. And when they did, even though they had huge, it caused huge problems in their land, but they were able to do it. And instead of humbling themselves before God and realizing that it's only through God that that their protection is assured, instead they brag about it. And Isaiah actually records this. And Isaiah basically talks about the kingdom being destroyed. And he says, the bricks are falling down, but we're going to rebuild with hewn stones. This is the attitude of the Israelites at the time. The sycamores are cut down, but we're going to change them into cedars. Now, obviously, a hewn stone is a better building material than a brick, and a cedar tree is a better tree to build with than a sycamore. But these were the bricks and the sycamores were what God gave them to use, and the rest of these had to be imported. So they had to be imported into Israel in order to do this. So they're using imported stuff instead of using the materials that God had naturally given them. So they came back. The Assyrians came back about 7 years later. This time they were able to overthrow the northern kingdom, and they basically they drove them off their lands, and they went someplace in what they call the North Countries, whatever that is. Okay, so now question for everybody: the promise is this still a covenant land? Is it still a covenant place? And the answer is yes. And another question is does the covenant reside with the land, or does the covenant reside with the people who occupy the land? And I think the answer to that is both. There is a covenant part on the land itself. Whether the people are there or not is up to them. But there is still a covenant with the people themselves and about gathering and so forth. So now they're chugging along here a little bit more. So the northern tribes of Israel are now off of the covenant lands. The southern tribes are still hanging in there. And this prophet by the name of Lehi comes along. And he has a dream or a vision and basically prophesies that the southern tribes, basically the southern half of Israel, is going to be taken over by the Babylonians. And of course, they don't believe him. He takes the modern day equivalent of a GPS satellite system, okay, and I should say the ancient equivalent of that. And then they leave, and about 14 years later, according to mainstream time frames, they are Jerusalem. The southern tribes of Jerusalem, including Jerusalem itself, is sacked by the Babylonians about 586 BC. So we have now, how many of the promised land people are on the promised land? They've all been removed. And this is the reason why they have to be brought back. They have to be, the tribes have to return before the second coming of Christ, okay, according to the prophecies. So these are the captivity routes and so forth. Now, Lehi and his family, they leave around 600 BC. Of course, we know that. They go down the borders of the sea. They end up at Bountiful. They take they make a ship. They take the ship across there. And I don't have time to get into details about this, but this ship right here, the Phoenicia ship, is one that actually has accomplished, literally done 2 of the 3 voyages of the Book of Mormon. A lot of people don't know that, and it's really sorry and sad that they don't. But basically, they actually have done the routes and have proven that that these routes are available. I could take just a minute and explain that a little bit more if we want to do that. But let me just, well, I'll just let me see. Did I go? Okay, so I'll just say that the route that they went, basically, they departed. They built the ship in Awad, Syria. They sailed it through the Suez Canal down the Red Sea and over onto the Saudi Arabian Peninsula there. And Salalah, Oman, they left October the 26th of 2009. They departed and they went way out past the Horn of Africa because there's pirates and so forth there. They went way out into the ocean, into the Indian Ocean. They sailed. Now, I have a 2-hour presentation just about this part, but I'll just say that in the Book of Mormon, it says that they gathered fruit and honey in abundance, got aboard the ship, and were blown before the winds. When do you have fruit and honey in abundance on the Saudi Arabian Peninsula? And the answer is in the fall, just like everybody else in the Northern Hemisphere, because it is in the Northern Hemisphere. I actually double checked this with beekeepers and orchards and so forth over there, and sure enough, it is in the fall. So if they left in the fall of the year, like the Phoenicia ship did, October the 26th, there's only one direction they could go, unless we basically say that God changed all the weather patterns on the earth. But if he didn't change all the weather patterns on the earth, then the natural way it would be from about from spring through late summer and into fall, the winds along this area go from the Indian Ocean and go north and east up into basically India and up towards the Himalayan mountains. But in the fall of the year, about in the beginning of September, the mid-September, the winds change and they come out of the Himalayan mountains and they blow south and west along the coastline of Saudi Arabia there. So the Book of Mormon gives us just enough information to essentially know which direction they're going to go if the wind patterns and ocean currents are not just completely changed by God, which I am a personal believer that basically God works through natural means to accomplish his things, and he doesn't just willy-nilly change stuff. But anyway, but nevertheless, so if that's the case, then they were blown and in the Phoenicia ship south and west. They came down to the Comoros Islands. Interestingly enough, the Comoros Islands, I don't know if any of you know what the capital city of the Comoros Islands is named.
Moroni.
That's right. It's Moroni. It's Moroni, as they would say it, or Moroni, as we would say it. But it's fascinating to, I mean, again, I don't put a lot of emphasis on place names because place names change all the time. It's not a very solid thing. But I think it is at least interesting that Moroni is the name of the capital city of the Comoros, which sounds like Comora Islands. Now they got down to March the 2nd, 2010. They had the mainsail was torn to pieces in the huge storm that they happened in. They were actually blown backwards on the water for 3 days. When I say backwards, the GPS, they were sailing to the west, but the GPS system kept saying that they were sailing. They were actually moving to the east. They're going, well, we can clearly see the sails and everything. It's not a hard breeze, but it's a little bit of a breeze. It turns out that they had sailed out of the Indian Ocean currents into the Southern Atlantic currents, and the Southern Atlantic currents were taking them. They were actually going east. Were taking them east faster than the winds were blowing them to the west. So by GPS, they were actually finding out that they were actually, they were going backwards according to what the wind was showing. Anyway, so they departed Cape Town, South Africa, March 22nd, 2010. The reason why this is all important is just because the History Channel documentary called Who Really Discovered America, they actually talk about the Book of Mormon, and they said, there's entire religions that are based on this book. And then they basically dismiss everybody. They're saying, well, yeah, it's certainly, they got a hold of people who are scholars basically that said that instead of coming this direction, they went the other direction to the east and crossed the Pacific Ocean, which would have required them to go almost all the way down to Antarctica, go down around underneath the Australia, New Zealand, south of there, and then come up the west coast of you can see in this picture here on the left-hand side, come up the west coast of South America to make a west coast landing on Central America. And they said the History Channel, they did a bunch of research on that. They said it would take a minimum of 580 days, which is more than a year and a half. And they said certainly a ship could make it, but a ship would make it with dead people because you couldn't carry that much water and food to supply, 30, 40 people that the Book of Mormon talks about may have been on the ship. And so again, the gospel gets another kick in the teeth by the History Channel, because of the idea of going across the largest ocean on the planet at nearly its widest point, to make a west coast landing on Central America. Instead, if you go this direction, basically it was by June 12th of 2010, they hit the most westerly point in the expedition. They were 350 miles off of Cuba, and they were making 100 miles a day. They were 3.5 days away from making landfall in North America. And anyway, so they continued up. There's a lot more to this story, but I'll just say that bottom line is they arrived in Beirut, Lebanon, October the 12th of 2010. If we were to take Lehi's route and do the same thing, if Lehi departed, let's say just hypothetically, October the 26th of 590 BC, and did this route, it would have taken 103 days without stopping to arrive in South Africa about February 6th of 589 BC. Again, assuming that they were doing this. Now, one thing about the ship I didn't mention early on, it's really important, and that is this ship was actually patterned after 600 BC. It was a 600 BC replica ship made by the Phoenicians, who actually were doing this route around 600 BC. And we know that because of Herodotus, who was a Greek historian, philosopher guy, and he wrote a history basically, and he said that the Phoenicians, and who are the Phoenicians? They're basically Israelites. Phoenicia was, one of the towns of Phoenicia was basically Tyre and Sidon. Of course, Sidon is the same name as the river system in the Book of Mormon. But they were there just like in Lebanon area. And so that's where Tyre and Sidon were anciently located. So these Phoenicians, and of course, Paul can tell you that the Phoenician language and the Hebrew language are practically the same language. They have a few differences, but they share the vast majority of characters and so forth. Anyway, so how do we know what these Phoenician ships look like? Well, because they've actually found some in the mud of the Mediterranean Sea. There's one called the Jules Verne 7, which was recovered, and it's now in Marseille, France, in a museum there. So we know what kind of wood they were using and what kind of technology they had, how the joinery and how they were making these ships, and even how big they were and how long and wide and so forth. So we know a lot about these ships now. And bottom line is that using that same ship, Lehi's potential arrival in North America would have been between April the 10th and April the 25th of 589 BC. Why is that significant? Well, it's significant because what did they do when they arrived here in America? They took the seeds that they had brought with them from Jerusalem and they began to plant them. It was planting season in North America. Well, actually, it's not planting season in South America because it's south of the equator, but it is planting season in the northern hemisphere. And also, if Lehi brought seeds with him from Jerusalem, Jerusalem and the area that I have pointed out here around Tallahassee, Florida, is literally within 1 degree of the same latitude on the earth. So seeds from Jerusalem would have done very well there. Okay, let's talk about the covenant here for a second. So 2 Nephi chapter 1 says, notwithstanding our afflictions, we have obtained this land of promise, a land which is choice above all other lands. A land which the Lord God hath covenanted with me should be a land for the inheritance of my seed. So this land, this covenant land, is choice above all other lands. This is when Lehi, this is after Lehi has found out that he is a direct descendant of Joseph of Egypt. And so this becomes Joseph's land. How many promised lands are there? Well, I'm going to actually defer to the ultimate expert on promised lands, and that is Jesus Christ himself. When he was with the Nephites, he identified two promised lands. Number one, he said, 3 Nephi chapter 20, verse 29, he says, I will remember the covenant which I made with my people. I have made a covenant with them that I would gather them together in my own due time. I would give unto them again the land of their fathers for their inheritance, which is the land of Jerusalem, which is the promised land unto them for how long again? Yeah, forever, saith the Father. Again, how long is forever with God? It's a very long time. So this covenant doesn't go away just because the people are removed from the land. The covenant remains on the land because it was made by covenant to Abraham forever. And that's the land. That's Jerusalem. So this is Canaan and Canaan. This is Jerusalem. And now let's take a look at the next scripture here in the same chapter in 3 Nephi. It says, Behold, this people will I establish in this land, unto the fulfilling of the covenant which I made with your father Jacob. And it, meaning this land, shall be a new Jerusalem. Okay, so we've got Canaan, Jerusalem, and a new Jerusalem. Does anybody see a pattern developing here? Okay. So we've got these two promised lands. Christ didn't mention any other promised lands. Those are the only two promised lands that Christ happened to mention in 3 Nephi. Now, if we go to that, so about a year and a half, this is part of a longer presentation, so this is going to be cutting into, going to be cut some pieces out here. But anyway, bottom line is that section 84 in the Doctrine and Covenants, it's about a year and a half after the Lord told Joseph Smith that he's going to tell him where this new Jerusalem is located. It says, it's the revelation of Jesus Christ unto his servant Joseph Smith, Jr., to stand upon Mount Zion, which shall be the city of New Jerusalem. The city will be built beginning at the temple lot, appointed by the finger of the Lord in the western boundaries of the state of Missouri. This city of New Jerusalem shall be built beginning at this place, even the place of the temple. And we all know where that is. Right? Missouri, USA is where this new Jerusalem is going to be built. Is everybody with me on that? I hope so. I can't see you, so I'm hoping you're nodding your heads or whatever. Anyway, so in section 45 in the Doctrine and Covenants, it says, and it shall be called the New Jerusalem. It's a land of peace and a city of refuge, a place of safety for the saints. The glory of God shall be there, and the terror of the Lord also will be there, insomuch that the wicked will not come into it, and it shall be called Zion. So the New Jerusalem is going to be called Zion, which means that Missouri, USA is where the New Jerusalem is, which is the Zion that's being talked about here. And if we go to the Pearl of Great Price in Moses, it says, and it shall be called Zion, a New Jerusalem. This is going to be a holy city that's being talked about here. And even in the Articles of Faith that Joseph Smith put together, he says that we believe in the literal gathering of Israel and the restoration of the 10 tribes, that Zion, in parentheses, the New Jerusalem, will be built upon the American continent. Well, where is that being built? Well, it's in Missouri. Right? So is everybody with me so far? Now, there's been some speculation about things, so I've added this little section here, but this is Joseph Smith in the Annual General Conference of the Church. This is on Monday, April the 8th of 1844. This is just not very long before his death. And he said this, he says, there's been great discussion in relation to Zion, where it is and where the gathering of the dispensation is, in which I am now going to tell you. The prophets have spoken and written upon it, but I'll make a proclamation that will cover a broader ground. The whole of America is Zion itself, from north to south, and is described by the prophets who declare that it is the Zion where the mountain of the Lord should be, and it should be in the center of the land. When elders shall take up and examine the old prophecies in the Bible, they will see it. So let's talk about this for just a second, break this down just a little bit. Joseph Smith's Zion, what are the qualifiers that he just said? He said the prophets have spoken and written upon it. Okay. Well, if Zion is all of North and South America, has that been established by the prophets? The prophets spoken and written upon it. Okay. Now, this is what he said specifically, according to the sources. It says the whole of America is Zion itself, from north to south. Now, this is where things got really interesting. Because Wilford Woodruff he wrote in his journal that what he heard was all of North and South America is Zion. But when when this was written down originally, the words were a little bit different. He says the whole of America is Zion itself from north to south. So, question, what does America mean? Okay. When it says the whole of America, what does it mean? Well, if you go to Wikipedia in the English language, the Americas, plural, refers to the land masses of North and South America, whereas America, singular, refers almost exclusively to the United States of America. And that's all fine and dandy, but what did it mean to Joseph Smith? Okay. When he uses the term America, what did he mean? Well, here's an example from the Evening and Morning Star, December of 1832. The Book of Mormon declares that the land which is now called America, singular, is a choice land above all others, and we believe it because the Lord has said it and we've seen it. At present, the world thinks much of America because it, again singular, is trying the experiment of a free government. And the people of the Lord are beginning to lift up their heads and rejoice because Jesus the Redeemer is setting up his kingdom upon this choice land above all others, not to be any more confounded. Okay? Let me ask you a question. Is all of North and South America trying the experiment of a free government? And the answer is clearly no, they are not. The United States is. America is the United States in this sense. Now, I've got several other ones I could show you, but for time, I've taken those out. So, the next question is what did from north to south mean when Joseph Smith gave this? This is from D&C 87, verse 3 and 4. It says, for behold, the southern states shall be divided against the northern states. That's December the 25th of 1832. In this same time frame, this is before this general conference happened in 1844, where Joseph talks about the whole of America design itself, north and south. He'd already had the revelation about the coming Civil War, where the North was going to be, the South was going to rise up against the North, basically, and they're going to have a huge clash. So Joseph Smith understood that America was going to be divided north and south. He's not talking about North and South America here. He's talking about the Confederacy versus the Union here. He says it's going to be described by the prophets. That's kind of the same thing as number one. He says it's where the mountain of the Lord should be. What and where is the mountain of the Lord? Well, here in 2 Nephi chapter 12, it tells us it shall come to pass in the last days when the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains. For out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. Now I think he's talking about during the millennium there, where Zion is basically where the law is going to go forth, but the word of God from Jerusalem. So Christ is going to reign personally in Jerusalem, but the law is going to go forth from basically America or Zion. Okay, and I think you're going to love this one. It says it would be in the center of the land. That was another qualifier. This Zion was going to be in the center of land. Well, Zion is in the center of what land? What land is Zion in the center of? If Zion is Missouri, okay, what land is it in the center of? In fact, I love this in section 57, the Doctrine and Covenants. It tells us, O ye elders of thy church, saith the Lord your God, in this land, which is the land of Missouri, which is the land which I have appointed and consecrated for the gathering of the saints. Wherefore, this is the land of promise and the place for the city of Zion. You know, I hate it when the Lord just kind of beats around the bush and doesn't tell us exactly what he means, right? Okay. I think that is absolutely clear. I mean, I don't know how we can misunderstand that. He said, Missouri, this is the land of promise, the place for the city of Zion, and thus saith the Lord your God. If you're going to receive wisdom, here's wisdom. Behold, the place which is now called Independence is the center place. Now, let me ask you a question. When Joseph Smith received this revelation, D&C 57, was Independence in the middle of something, or was it actually on the far western edge of civilization at that point in time? And the answer, of course, is Independence was as far west as you could go. You basically go any further west, you're going into basically Indian territory, the Mexican territories, right? So when Joseph Smith received this revelation, I'm sure he was kind of scratching his head and said, wait a minute, Independence is the center place? It's the center of what? It's in the very far western reaches of civilization as we know it at the time he received the revelation, right? But let me ask you a question. Do you think that God knows what this nation would one day become? And I think the answer is clearly yes, he does. And so my question is, if the United States is this land, is that approximately in the center of it? Well, some people say, well, it looks like it's a little bit to the east, but then I remind them that after California falls off into the ocean, it'll pretty much center that right up. Okay, so it'll be nice and centered up as soon as California is gone. No, no, just kidding. Actually, if you take a look at that, Missouri is almost dead center, north and south and east and west. It's just a hair further to the east than that. But again, the Lord was talking about being divided north and south. So if that's the case, then the United States fits the bill as the land where Missouri is the center place. If the United States is the land, then is Zion, the New Jerusalem, in the center of it? And the answer is yes. Now, on the other hand, if it's all of North and South America, and that is where Zion, the New Jerusalem, is located by Scripture and by the Lord, let me ask you a question. If North and South America is the land of Zion, New Jerusalem, it is Missouri in the center of it. Any answers? No, it's not. It's not anywhere close to the center. Center would be down closer to Panama. So either Joseph Smith got it wrong, or the Lord got it wrong, or the United States is the promised land that we're talking about here. It's the land that Joseph Smith and the Lord were talking about when he had the independence was in the center of it. And then I love this because this is a double prophetic witness. This is actually from the Book of Mormon and Ether. You have the brother of Jared, well, basically Ether is writing this. And then Moroni is doing the transcription of Ether's work. And so Moroni seconds it. So you have Ether prophesies and then Moroni seconds it. This is from Ether chapter 13, verse 4. It says, Behold, Ether saw the days of Christ, and he spake concerning a new Jerusalem upon this land, and that a new Jerusalem should be built upon this land, and to the remnant of the seed of Joseph, for which things there has been a type. So there's two things here that are important. Number one is that New Jerusalem is going to be on this land. And number two, this is for the remnant of the seed of Joseph. So this is the reason why America is the land of Joseph. Okay, Missouri, USA, where the New Jerusalem is going to be built. It's the Zion. It's the land of promise. It's this land of the Book of Mormon. And then in Second Nephi chapter 1, it says, Notwithstanding our afflictions, we have obtained this land of promise, the land which is choice above all other lands. God has made a covenant with me for the inheritance of this land, and also those who should be led out of other countries by the hand of the Lord. Okay. So it's a choice land above all other lands by covenant with God. And then last but not least, it says in Alma chapter 46, came to pass that when he had poured out his soul to God, he named all the land which was south of the land desolation, yea, and find all the land both on the north and on the south, a chosen land and the land of liberty. They actually talk about a land of liberty 8 times in the Book of Mormon. They talk about this land that they are on will one day be a land of liberty. Is there a difference between freedom and liberty? We don't have time to get into this too much, but just really quickly, this is Noah Webster's 1828 dictionary, which was in use at the time of Joseph Smith. It's in fact the very first one that was ever done, dictionary in English. It says to be free means not being under necessity, restraint, physical or moral. Freedom is a state or exemption from power or control of another. So that's being no control from anybody else. Liberty, on the other hand, is freedom from restraint in a general sense. Natural liberty consists in the power of acting as one thinks fit, without any restraint or control, except from the laws of nature. What are the laws of nature? Well, religious liberty is the free right of adopting opinions and so forth. Okay. Nature, in a general sense, whatever is made or produced, word that comprehends all the works of who? God. Nature is used for the agent, creator, author, producer of things, or the powers that produce them. We mean that they are produced by God, the creator. So that's what nature and nature's law is. Okay. So the law of nature is a rule of conduct arising out of the natural relations of human beings established by the creator. So this is so clearly this is talking about there's a difference here. Okay. We don't have time to go into that. Or Patrick Henry talking about the destiny of nations. This is one of the best definitions of the difference between freedom and liberty that has ever been. And it came right from the Book of Mormon itself. 2 Nephi chapter 2 says, Wherefore men are free according to the flesh, by reason of being born Each of us are given the opportunity to make decisions without any restraint. That's what freedom is. And he says, but they are free to choose. And he gives us two choices. Choice number one, liberty and eternal life through the great mediator of all men, or to choose choice number two, captivity and death. What does that tell us? It tells us that liberty is literally the conscientious choice to follow God and his laws. Freedom allows that to happen. Liberty is when you make the choice to follow God. So then it talks about here in First Nephi, it says it's above all other nations upon the face of the land, which is choice above all other lands. So it is a nation above all other nations. It's going to be among other nations then. It's not going to be just the only nation. It's going to be, there's going to be other nations all around it. So these are the two lands of promise. These are the two covenant lands. Adam and his posterity on one, and then Abraham and his posterity on the other. Now, when Abraham's posterity got sufficiently wicked to be driven off the land, where do you think God might want to bring them? How about back to the original promised land? The same one that was promised again forever to Adam and his posterity. Why would he not bring them back to the same promised land? And here in 2 Nephi, it gives us some interesting aspects about this land. It says, this land shall be a land of liberty unto the Gentiles. There'll be no kings upon the land. Well, what nation in the Americas, or what in all the Americas, has never had a king since its inception? Canada still has the Queen on their money. Even Mexico has had King Maximilian. The United States is the only nation that hasn't had a king since the nation was formed. Okay, and it says, "I will fortify this land against all other nations. He that fighteth against Zion shall perish, saith God. For he that riseth up a king against me shall perish. For I, the Lord, the King of heaven, will be their king." So the Lord is going to be the king. It's going to be a Christian nation. And clearly this is. In fact, in First Nephi, he prophesies, "I Nephi beheld that the Gentiles that came out of captivity were delivered by the power of God out of the hands of all other nations." In other words, they're going to become their own independent nation. "If so be that they shall serve him according to the commandments which he has given, it shall be a land of liberty unto them." Again, another time that they talk about this land of liberty. "Wherefore they shall never be brought down into captivity." If they're not going to be brought down into captivity, that means they have the iron dome, the shield of protection over them. And so God is protecting that nation and that land. Linked in the Book of Mormon, lands with New Jerusalem. This land, choice land, chosen land, is the place of the New Jerusalem. And there's no question. This is not speculation, folks. This is revelation. We know exactly where the New Jerusalem is going to be built, and it's not in Canada, it's not in Japan, it's not in Mexico. It is in Missouri. That's where the New Jerusalem is going to be. And this is basically saying that the Book of Mormon people are on that same land. The only nation that fulfills every Book of Mormon requirement to be the promised land is the United States of America. I'm going to pass this one up, but basically this is an awesome thing. Basically, I'll just say this is the one quote I want to pull out of that, though. "The United States is the promised land foretold in the Book of Mormon by Elder L. Tom Perry, the Quorum of the 12 Apostles of the Salt Lake Church." Okay. What was this covenant God made with Abraham? The land, posterity, prosperity, and security. Interestingly enough, anybody know what this image is of? It's the Constitution, and this happens to be the preamble portion of it. How many of you knew that embedded in the preamble part of the Constitution, kind of like it's abstract, if you will, are all four aspects of the Abrahamic covenant? The preamble of the Constitution says, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, to ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." There it is. All four of the parts of the covenant are in there, and they sought these blessings by an ordination. What's an ordination? It's a contract between God and man. So this nation was actually set up by covenant. Was this document inspired? Well, the Lord seems to think so, because in Doctrine and Covenants 101, verse 80, it says, "And for this very purpose have I, the Lord, established the constitution of this land, by the hands of wise men whom I am going to insert again, the Lord raised up unto this very purpose. How many times has this ever happened before in the history of the earth, where God basically set up a government, specifically raising up men for the purpose of establishing it? As far as I know, this is the only one, and it's the last one. There hasn't been any others either. This is the one and only in all the world's history that God basically said that. Okay, we're not going to get into this. This has to do with the founding fathers coming to the St. George Temple. It's pretty awesome, but okay. What is the obligation associated with the covenant? That's it. Keep the commandments. That's all you got to do. As a nation, they don't all have to be, tithing payers. They don't have to even all be part of God's church. They just have to keep the minimum requirement, and that is to keep the commandments. As a nation, as long as they will keep the commandments, they will be blessed with those blessings. So how well are we doing as a nation at keeping these commandments? How well are we doing about thou shalt not bear false witness or thou shalt not kill? Well, unless they're not born yet, then it's okay to kill them, right? Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. I don't think we're doing so well with that. And every nation previously, from Adam and his posterity, they forgot about this covenant and they got swept off the land. The Jaredites came to this land. They forgot about the covenant. They had a civil war down to one guy and they were swept off the land through civil war. The Nephites came to this same land, the same covenant nation, the same covenant ground of the New Jerusalem, and they also forgot about the covenant, and they also had a civil war fight, and basically the Nephites were wiped out. The Lamanites did remain, however, in this particular case. And then we have George Washington on the day of his inauguration. He invokes a covenant with God with his right arm held to the square and his left hand in the Bible. On the verse that says that Joseph will become a fruitful bough, yea, a fruitful bough by a well whose branches run over the wall, which means over the ocean. The founding fathers understood that Joseph's posterity, Joseph's inheritance, wasn't in the old world. Joseph's inheritance was here in the new world, and America is that land. It's the land of Joseph. This just goes in and shows that in the Book of Mormon, the Nephites understood that they were under this covenant with God. He says, I, Lehi, have obtained a promise. What was the promise? As long as you keep the commandments, you're going to prosper upon the face of this land. It will be kept from all other nations, that you may possess this land for yourselves. And so you keep the commandments, you're going to be blessed in the face of this land, and nobody's going to molest you. And you'll dwell safely here forever. This is the Adamic / Abrahamic covenant that Lehi is invoking here. He's saying that we're under the same covenant here. He says, therefore, this land is consecrated unto him who he shall bring. As long as we serve him according to the commandments, this will be a land of liberty. It'll never be brought down into captivity, and unto the righteous it shall be blessed for how long again? Forever. This is the same forever land that Adam and Eve had. The same forever land that the Jaredites had, and so forth. But whether the people are there or not is up to them. The land itself has this covenant as well. And Joseph Smith himself, in the Kirtland dedicatory prayer on March the 27th, 1836, he says, have mercy, O Lord, upon all the nations of the earth. Have mercy upon the rulers of our land. And may those principles which were so honorably and nobly defended, namely the constitution of our land by our fathers, be established again. How long again? Forever. Important. Importance of the United States of America. This is President Harold B. Lee. He says, I have faith in America. You and I must have faith in America if we understand the teachings of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Why? In thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. Okay, this is where missionary work is going to go forth. The vast majority of missionary work is going to come from this particular nation because of the blessings of the covenant. This is on George Washington's inauguration day in 1789. This is when in New York, the state of New York. It's actually in the city of New York. And this is from the National Archives. George Washington's got his right arm to the square. His hand is on the Bible. Now, it's not showing correctly because historically, George Washington literally opened the Bible up to Genesis chapter 40, I think it's 48, verse 22, in which he basically, it says, Joseph will become a fruitful bough by a well whose branches run over the wall. Excuse me, it's Genesis 49, 22. Joseph is a fruitful bough by a well whose branches run over the wall. What was this covenant God made with Abraham? Land, posterity, prosperity, and security. Interestingly enough, when the people become so wicked that they begin to ignore and remove themselves from God, God has no other choice but to remove the special blessings that He's been giving them. And what's interesting is He always does it in reverse order. He removes these blessings in reverse order. So He basically takes security away first. Then He takes away their prosperity. Then He takes away their posterity. Then He takes away their land. They're swept off the land. Because each time when these happens, when you have a security breach, when you have your money taken away, when you have wars and people die, it causes people to humble themselves and return back to God with their hearts and minds. And so this covenant with Abraham is doing here. I was just here about 5 or 6 weeks ago. This is the St. Paul Church, downtown New York. Now, at the time of the inauguration, this is one of the places that George Washington came into this church to do his inauguration. Then he went down to the Congress building. But basically, so this is where the covenant with God actually was invoked in this building. At the time of this building, the church owned about 4 acres of land. Later on, those acres were sold, and it was sold again, I think 1 or 2 more times. And then finally, a big developer bought that piece of property, and they decided they were going to put the new icon of America, the buildings that will represent America to the world. This is the St. Paul. I like to call it cathedral, but it's anyway. That's a picture of it. And this is when they were building the 2 buildings on the piece of property that was owned by the church at the time of George Washington's inauguration. Anybody recognize what those 2 buildings are? You're right. It's the Twin Towers. So the place of the invocation of God's covenant with this nation through George Washington became the place of the sign of God's revoking of the covenant against on this nation for their failure to observe Him and continue to walk in His ways. And so He basically, not just one, but both of the icons of America were brought down at that time. If you remember Isaiah 9:10, the bricks are falling down, but we're going to build with hewn stones. The sycamores are cut down, but we're going to change them into cedars, right? The easiest way to remember this verse in Isaiah, just remember Isaiah 9:11, okay, because this is what it has to do with, both 10 and 11. This is the Twin Towers. This was the plaza between the Twin Towers that was there previously, and that plaza was made up of pavers. Pavers are bricks. This is what it looked like after 9/11. The bricks had literally been thrown down. In front of the church, the church, the St. Paul Cathedral, basically the St. Paul Church, it sits directly at the base of the North Tower. When the North Tower collapsed and came down, it blew out walls. You can actually see windows blown out here on the left-hand side, just right above the word 30 Verses Street. You see the windows blown out there and so forth. There's doors blown out. It blew out walls and so forth on this side. But the church itself was completely undamaged. They were absolutely astounded. They said it was a miracle that the church wasn't just literally blown down by the blast wave caused by the collapsing North Tower. You can actually see just on the back side here, there's a tree that's literally been uprooted. And the other tree has its branches, huge branches just snapped off like twigs. But the church itself sustained no damage. It was absolutely stunning. They couldn't believe that this was actually happening. So they decided to rebuild the new tower. They decided to build. We're not going to repent as a nation. We're not going to call for a national day of repentance. Instead, we're going to tell the world that we are awesome. We are America, and we are awesome, and we are not going to be brought down. We're going to rebuild, and not only are we going to rebuild, we're going to rebuild taller and bigger and better than it was before. And to start it all off, they went over to the Adirondack Mountains and got a 10-ton solid piece of granite to use as a base stone for the new Freedom Tower. Wait a minute, did I just say Freedom Tower? Yeah, they didn't call it the Tower of Liberty. They called it the Tower of Freedom. How many of you realize that by calling it the Tower of Freedom, it's an affront to God? This means that we are no longer under your law, God. We are free to choose, and we have not chosen liberty. We have not chosen to follow your way. And interesting, so they put this down in the bottom of the thing. They started to build on it, and this stone, the Freedom Stone they called it, it cracked, and they had to take it out and remove it. But they also did another. They had a sculptor did this thing on the very end of Wall Street today. And it's it's the roots sticking up that were uprooted from the tree that got blown over, the sycamore tree that had been blasted over. That actually saved. It was because of those sycamore trees that the church was saved. Actually, the sycamore trees took the brunt of the blast. And so they decided to memorialize these sycamore trees that had gone down by replacing it with a 20-foot Norway spruce that the Trinity Church named the Tree of Hope. Now, Norway spruce and cedar of Lebanon are both in the Piney family, the pine family. So these are basically where it was a sycamore, it's now a cedar tree. And it's called the Tree of Hope. They planted it exactly where one of the other previous sycamore trees were located. And a year later, they had to come and pull it out because the Tree of Hope died. Okay. You can't make this stuff up anyway. This is at the top of the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C. It is the tallest thing that will ever be on the Washington, D.C. skyline. Why is that the case? Because by law, no one can ever build anything taller than the Washington Monument. That's the reason why you don't see big skyscrapers in Washington, D.C. But on this aluminum cap piece here at the top of the Washington Monument, it has written on it several important dates, but this one you can't see it very well, but it says Laus Deo, basically meaning God be with us or God watch over us. That's what they put at the top of the Washington Monument that will never be anything built higher than that. Don't have time to get into this, but this is the new Freedom Tower. I need to update my slide deck with my new images of the Freedom Tower that I just took a few weeks ago. But let's just talk about that. No, we're not going to talk about that. This destruction at the time of Christ's death, and then Revelation. Okay, this is a different presentation. So this is talking about eclipses and so forth, which we don't have time to go into all that. What time is it getting to be?
Trying to round it up.
Yep. Okay. But that's pretty much. Let me just to finish this off basically here. This has some good stuff in it, but let's just round it up. Let's just be done here. So that's essentially, this has to do with the eclipses that have happened recently, creating an aleph. And we don't have time to get into all that, but basically, this is Alma. This is Captain Moroni said, "It came to pass, he rent his coat, took a piece thereof, and wrote upon it, in memory of our God, our religion, and freedom, our peace, our wives, and our children." And he poured his whole soul out to God about the land to the north and the south, and it says it was a chosen land, the land of liberty. Behold, we are a remnant of the seed of Jacob, we are a remnant of the seed of Joseph, whose coat was rent by his brethren to many pieces. Yea, and now behold, let us remember to keep the commandments of God. He's again referring back to this covenant with God. And now the design of the Nephites was to support their lands and their houses and so forth, and preserve their rights and their privileges, yea, and their liberty, that they might worship God according to their desires. And so that's what they were doing. Whoever will maintain the title upon this land, let them come forth in the strength of the Lord and enter into a covenant that they will maintain their rights and their religion. The Lord may bless them. And that's the last part here, Second Chronicles. If my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, forgive their sin, and heal their land. So there we go. That's it. So that's the reason why, in a nutshell, why we feel that the Book of Mormon happened here in North America. It is the promised land. It is the one that God set up with Adam and Eve. It is the same one that Christ refers to when he's with the Nephites in the Book of Mormon. It is the land of the New Jerusalem. It is in the center of the lands. It's where Joseph Smith sent the very first missionaries to New York and Ohio and Missouri. The first missionaries ever called. There's a lot more to it, but that's basically, in essence, that talks a little bit about the covenants. It didn't go into this and didn't have the covenant stuff about the 36 prophecies and promises, which is so powerful. But basically goes into and shows how the United States is the only nation in all of the Americas that can fulfill every requirement that is mentioned by the Book of Mormon to be the promised land. Okay.
Wow. Thank you, Rod. As host, I get the privilege of the first question.
Okay.
I'm sure there will be a whole bunch of them, so I'm just going to go back to the beginning and ask the first one that came up for me.
Okay.
And clearly, I have a whole bunch more, but I'm confident other people will capture most of those. Let me call your attention, ladies and gentlemen, to the idea that if you go down to the React button, raise your hand there, then that makes it easier for Deb to keep people in the queue and keep track of who's next. If you don't have that access, wave, and she does a pretty good job of keeping people in order anyway. All right, back to the my first question.
Yes.
My Bible, our Bible,
Yes.
it's that there are four rivers coming out of Eden. I believe it's Gershon, Pershon, Tigris, and Euphrates.
And then they form into four heads.
And that's where the Garden of Eden was. Adam and Eve were there. And so how do you move Adam from the Tigris and Euphrates to the Grand River of Missouri?
Okay, so there's this is going to be a little bit of it would take a long time to explain it in detail. So it's going to sound a little bit crazy, but bottom line is, Orson Pratt made the comments in his book, Orson Pratt's Works, that Joseph Smith told him that the earth today is approximately 1/4 of its original size. There had been pieces of the earth had been removed from the city of Enoch to the city of Salem to the 10 tribes, and that the earth as it is today is about a quarter of that, a quarter of the size. If all of these places were actually here on the earth at one point in time, then that means that the earth as it is now, the continents were all together in what is kind of commonly known as Pangea, right? If Pangea actually existed at the same time on this earth, it would have made all of this mass of the earth on one side of the earth. It would have been highly not balanced. There had to be corresponding matching continental, material to counterbalance the Pangea when it was on the Earth, or else the Earth would not be in balance. It would not. It would be like a tire when it gets, when it's not in balance. So in answer to the question, basically, when Pangea was all together, then these four rivers. And I don't know that we know that those rivers were the same back in those times. I mean, if the earth has changed as dramatically as what that would suggest, then it could be that these rivers, changed course, were different, or maybe even completely different rivers. Maybe were actually symbolically named later on. But the bottom line is that if that's the case, then why do we think that the land of promise was in Missouri? And it has to do with those revelations from Joseph Smith. So if Adam, the other thing is if that's the case, then Adam and his posterity, if they were here in America, um, I think I guess which one is the most clear about the rivers there, or that Adam was in Adam-ondi-Ammon, and then Joseph Smith received the revelation by the Lord that says that Adam-ondi-Ammon is in Missouri. I think the Missouri one is clearer than where these rivers are located. That help? Does that make sense why we would think that?
Well,
It
no.
also it
And
also makes sense that then if that's the case, then that's where Noah would have built his ark here in America, and it would ended up in the mountains of Ararat over in Turkey, and
the
that's a heck of
Pangea,
that's a flood.
the geologists tell us the Pangea is hundreds of millions of years old, whereas
Mhm.
people are only a few thousand. So you got a major time gap there to
Yes.
reconcile.
Yes, absolutely. And if we had time, about 3 or 4 hours to go into universal model stuff, I can tell you about how rock dating basically, how did we date these things? How are the rocks dated? It has to do with radiometric dating. It has to do with rubidium, strontium dating, and potassium argon dating was kind of the earliest one, and so forth. And how do we know these dates? And if we go into the rocks, basically the dating is all based on the last time the rocks were melted from into a magma, and the assumption is that the earth is a big ball of molten magma. And sometime we'd love to have again, this would be a long one, but we'd have to have a conversation about is the scientific understanding of the age of the earth and the scriptural understanding of the age of the earth. Is there a way to reconcile those two? And I mean, one way to reconcile it is as well as basically say, well, the scriptures have got it. They didn't get it quite right. That we don't understand the scriptures properly. Another way to understand it is maybe science has got it wrong. And I can show you actual hard scientific evidence that science has the structure of the earth actually incorrect. I know that's going to sound like a big thing, but like I said, if we had about 2 or 3 hours to talk about it, I'll just put it this way. Quartz makes up the primary constituent of all of the foundational basement rocks of the earth. All the continental crusts of the earth are quartz-based rocks, like granite, gneiss, schist, so forth.
Sandstone.
If we're going to understand how the earth is formed, we have to understand how quartz rocks form. Turns out that geology believes that quartz rocks can form from a melt, from magma, basically from lava, but they've never been able to show that ever can even happen in a laboratory or in nature. In fact, what they have found is what they call the hydrothermal process, which is basically that quartz rocks form by precipitating out of solution. And there's 20 companies around the world that make quartz crystals commercially, and they know exactly how the quartz rocks are made, and they cannot come from a melt. So if all of the dating is based on the last time when the rocks were melted, what happens when you can demonstrate that the vast majority of rocks on the earth were never melted at any point in time? Because if they had been, they would be beta quartz instead of alpha quartz, but yet most of them, almost all of them are alpha quartz, which again, without going into the details, it's too much to try to go.
And I could counter that Joseph Smith made mistakes too, but I'm not
Sure,
going to do that. I'm going to open it up
sure.
for Terry Walker. I think he's next, unless Deb
Yes.
thought somebody else first.
Yeah, Terry and then Joe. Go ahead, please, Terry.
Okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate for a minute. You showed the scripture that says that the word comes out of the mountains. Missouri does not have a mountain. They have some hills in southern part of the state called the Ozarks.
Yep.
If that's the mountains, then Branson or somebody else is where the center is.
Uh-huh.
Out of curiosity, how's your reaction to that?
Well, it's interesting because actually, at Adamantiaman, which I mean, you've all been there, right? I mean, how flat
I've
is
been
that?
there.
But in the scriptures, it actually talks about the mountains of Adamantiaman, right? Basically, they literally, there's a scripture that talks about Adamantiaman being a mountain. I don't know if that means it's going to someday become more of a mountain. Clearly, it's not a mountain today. Yeah, and also, I think we're talking about a region, not a specific, like a single peak or whatever. A mountain would be a region, an area. And so I think that now, of course, those in the Salt Lake Church would probably say, though, the church is going to be established in the tops of the mountains, and clearly Salt Lake City is in the mountains. So they would probably say, that's a feather in the cap of the Salt Lake Church because it is actually established in the tops of the mountains. But again, bottom line is, like you said, it comes back to Missouri. Missouri is the promised land. I mean, when you go out there to far west and you look at that, God called that my holy land. There's nowhere else that he's ever said that before. My holy land.
Thank you.
I don't know if that answers your question or not, but that's
Yes and no, but there's no answer to the thing that I proposed. So anyway, uh,
okay.
I've got another idea on
Yeah,
where Adam and company lived, and that was in the spirit world, not the physical world, but that's another story.
sure. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different ways to slice and dice and try to figure things out. Um, I think we all do to some point try to use Occam's razor, whichever requires the least amount of assumptions is probably the closest to the truth. Doesn't mean it is the truth, but it usually will lead better to the truth. The simpler the answer. So yeah.
Okay, thanks, Terry. Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm curious as to why your maps consistently show uh, Canaan, the New Jerusalem, and also Adamonte Ammon as being centered in northern Alabama or Tennessee, southern Tennessee, rather than on Missouri.
Spatial difficulties apparently on my part. I just, that's why I kind of made it bleed out because those particular images are from NASA and they don't have any states lines on them. So I'm kind of best guessing it. But yeah, you're right. It is a little bit probably too far to the east. And
And south.
it should be a little bit further to the west. The ones that have the states maps on them though, when I had it, the little star on it, that should be accurate there.
All right, thank you.
Hey, who else?
There's a whole bunch more. It would be fun, although I just did some presentations up in Island Park, Idaho. This is just right next to West Yellowstone. And it literally takes about 4 hours to go over this information about the universal model stuff that talks about the rocks and all that kind of stuff. But it is powerful. It's really fascinating stuff. And it is a paradigm changer. It may sound like somewhat heretical, but when you realize, for example, if the Earth is a big ball of molten magma, why does it have a magnetic field when the very best magnets in the earth, on the world are ceramic magnets and they only go up to about 500 degrees? But to melt rocks, you have to get over 3,000 degrees. Anything over 500 degrees destroys magnetic fields. So there's just some things like that, things like, the petrified wood. My colleagues and I have been able to actually take pieces of wood and pieces of bone, like chicken bone, and literally fully petrify it into a rock. And it didn't take 60 to 80 million years. It took about 48 to 56 hours when all the conditions are correct. So that question then becomes when were all the conditions correct on the Earth for petrification to happen? And we have a number of geologists who have been just dumbfounded by some questions that we've asked that we have answers for that they didn't have answers for. Like, for example, when it comes down to petrified wood and petrified dinosaur bones, why is it that we don't find we find practically none? In fact, when I've asked geologists this question, they kind of scratch their head and go, well, But if the process of fossilization, the process of petrification is a process that takes 60 to 80 million years, and there was dinosaurs back on the earth at that point in time and plants and so forth, trees, and then and we still have plants and trees and animals on the earth today, then you would think that there would be a lot of stuff that's in the process of petrifying. In other words, where's the stuff that's like 50% petrified, 25% petrified, 10% petrified, or like 95% petrified? But instead, it is petrified or it's not. There's no middle ground, which tells you that it's not a process at all. It's an event. And the event that caused the petrification has to have three ingredients. It has to be done in water. It has to be done at about 400 degrees Celsius. It has to be done at 13,000 psi pressure. Because when those three things come together, quartz, which is the primary constituent of fossils, agate and chert and so forth, quartz will literally dissolve into the water and then it precipitates out of water, just like salt or sugar does when you make a salt solution or a sugar solution and you let the water evaporate out and it creates crystals. It does the same thing. It just does it at very different temperatures and pressures than we're used to on the surface of the earth. And the only explanation for that is a worldwide flood. And then the question becomes, well, where did all the water come from? And where did all the water go? So these are all questions that we address, and using the scriptures, we can actually realize if you go to Genesis or Abraham or Moses and you read the creation accounts, which came first, the dry land or the water? The water was first, and then the dry land appeared out of the water. How does dry land appear out of water? Well, it precipitates out of solution. There's about 20 companies around the world that make quartz crystals for oscillators and other electronics stuff, and they know that that's the only way that quartz rocks form is out of water, which means that dinosaur bones. Why do we have dinosaur bones? For example, we know exactly what a dinosaur, a T-Rex tricuspid heart valve looks like because the valve was so perfectly preserved in the stone, but it's only just a couple of millimeters thick. How did that not just completely decompose over millions of years or even over just a week or two? Why did that not decompose to the point where it just becomes mush? Instead, it's perfectly preserved in the fossil record. We have fish heart muscles. We have, dinosaur brain tissue. They've actually found red blood cells now and collagen in a T-Rex up in Hell's Creek Formation in Montana. Things aren't nearly as old as we have been told. Things are more like what God said. And that's basically, without going to, that's all the detail we can go into because of the fact that we don't have another 6 hours to go over all this stuff. But I'm just saying that we need to get to the point where we can trust the scriptures. Can we trust the scriptures? And I hope the answer is yes, that we can.
Okay. James,
So,
go ahead.
yes.
You there, James?
Okay. Okay. Can you hear me? Here we go.
Yep. Yep.
Okay. Hi, Rod. How are you?
Good. You're
I'm-
blurry.
Yeah, I'm blurry. I don't know. Can you hear me okay?
I can
Yeah,
hear you
we can
fine.
hear you.
Yeah, go ahead,
Okay.
James.
I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm blurry, but
Yeah.
as long as you can hear me. So anyway, I'm obviously very familiar with all things you've been saying and sympathetic to most of them. I'm going to be a little nitpicky though with you on one
Please.
point,
Yes.
and curious to know what your view would be when you cite the scripture about there being no king on the land and
Mhm.
using that to identify the United States.
Mhm.
In point of fact, that applies to countries of the Americas other than um, the United States. For example, the many South American countries, after they obtained their independence from Spain, like we obtained our independence from England, they never had another king on the land. Venezuela, Colombia, Peru, Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, and the countries of Central America, Honduras and Nicaragua and so forth. Those countries, now they had unstable governments, that's true, but they never had a royal government after they got rid of the Spanish rule. Just like, in North America, we were under England until we got rid of them. And then we didn't have another king. So my question is, how do you, how can we apply that particular scripture of saying there was no king on the land and say that must mean the United States, when in fact there are quite a number of other American countries which also never had a king after they had obtained their independence from Spain.
Yeah, yeah, good point. Basically, the reason why it has to do with the totality of it. So, for example, of the 36 prophecies and promises that are in the Book of Mormon, and I didn't put those in this particular presentation, but there's 36 prophecies in the Book of Mormon that talk about that nation. Be a mighty Gentile nation above all other nations. That it said it would be a land of liberty. It had be where the gospel would be restored, where the New Jerusalem is going to be located. There's so basically that's the no kings qualifier, if you will. Okay, it's just one of 36. So when you apply the other 35 of the prophecies, it does single it down. So yes, other nations could be considered possibly, as having, like for example, when it talks about a land where the Gentiles will come out of captivity. Well, there's probably more than one nation that that happened to, but it clearly happened to this nation. And but when you look at all 36 prophecies in total, there's only one nation that qualifies for all 36. Other nations can qualify for some of the prophecies, but not all of them. Does that make sense?
Okay, nope, that answers that particular question. Thank you. And again,
Yeah,
apologize
yeah, so
that I'm a
it
little.
doesn't automatically disqualify, the countries that have not had a king since their inception. It's just that when you look at the other all of the other prophecies, whatever nation it is that's being prophesied about, which is also another reason why this is important. If the Book of Mormon prophets are taking the time and effort to prophesy to that nation to try to warn them not to go down the same roads as they went down, it's kind of important that we understand where those prophecies apply specifically. Do they apply to Japan? Do they, apply to Turkey? Do they apply to Russia? Or do they apply to the United States of America? And is America the nation that's under that covenant with God? That means that if it doesn't perform on its side of the covenant, then it's going to get swept off the land. The people will be swept off the land. That's I think where the warning comes in.
I see. Okay, no, thank you. Also, I send Jonathan's apologies, but it's 4 o'clock in the morning for him, so
Yeah,
he says he watched the replay.
yeah, yeah. Jonathan actually said, "Hey, I'm looking forward to hearing your presentation, but it's not going to be tonight."
Right.
Yeah, he's awesome. I love Jonathan.
Okay, thank you much.
You bet. Thank you. And by the way, James, I don't know if James has James left or is he still there?
Still here.
Okay. Yeah, because if any of you don't know, Jonathan and James did the book about the use of interpreters and the rock and the stone in the hat, basically, which is just phenomenal. If you don't have that book, you should get a hold of it because it's just fantastic information.
Yeah, we did a presentation about that on the forum here, but
Yeah,
it was a couple years ago, so
yeah.
maybe
Oh,
we,
has it been that long?
yeah,
I didn't think the book's been out that long. See,
it was a
that's what
little while
happens when you
ago.
lose your hair.
Paul probably has the record of when we did that presentation, but yeah, no,
You bet.
we presented that to this group here.
You bet. It would be fun to actually do just a quick overview. I don't know how well that will work of the universal model stuff with the rocks and so forth, because I think, especially people like myself who have rocks in their head, um, really, being able to explain how rocks actually form and why they do some of the things they do, like I mentioned about the fossils and so forth, but also like things like sand. Why is there so much sand? If sand came from erosion, there's hundreds of times more sand than there should be based on the erosion rates and so forth that we see today. And it turns out that my colleagues and I were the first ones to actually ever make petrified wood and petrified bone and also sand and also sandstone in a laboratory that's indistinguishable from the natural stuff, the natural rocks. It's fascinating. Like I said, I think you'd find it really interesting. That's for a different day. And sometimes we have to go to this Book of Mormon DNA research. This is my book on the DNA part of it, if you can see that. Rediscovering the Book of Mormon remnant through DNA. You can actually download this book for free off of our website. It's about a $20 book, and you can just get it for free. And then this one is a newer one. If anybody's seen that or not.
Yes, we've seen that.
Yeah. Did you have David Reed on? I don't think you did you?
Yes, we did.
Oh, you did have David Reed on. Okay.
Yes.
Well, then we don't need to talk about DNA stuff. You already have the good stuff.
We also had um, uh, Southington
Oh,
came.
Simon?
Simon Southington came in, so we've had some good DNA background, but
Yeah.
certainly open to more.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask a question about your comment about Joseph Smith advocating the U.S. Constitution forever.
Mhm.
How do you reconcile that with him then authorizing the Constitution for the Kingdom of God in 1844?
Yeah. Well, apparently that is a good question. I think um, I don't know enough about the Constitution that the of the Kingdom of God to know how well or completely different it might be from the Constitution. But it is interesting to see that I think that just like it said that the word will go out and then the law will go out. I think there's two of them. One is for the law, one is for the word.
It basically puts him as the chief judge over all the land.
Yeah.
Which is an awful lot like a king.
Yeah, well, the reality of it is the Book of Mormon actually says that if you could always guarantee that that the person being the king would be righteous, then it would be better to have a king. And we know that Christ will ultimately be the king. So a kingship of some sort, but this is my question. Does the king have, I mean, if the king is Christ, then hallelujah. You know. So when he says the Constitution forever, um I'm not sure exactly how that works, Paul. I mean, basically, maybe, what do you think?
I think that he often spoke out of both sides of his face. I think he made a bunch of mistakes, and I
Mhm.
think you highlighted several of them this evening. But again,
Yeah.
you're suggesting it would take hours for me to have a chance to go back and reiterate those. But again,
We need more time.
our forum is one where we agree to accept people's presentations and treat them respectfully. And uh,
And you have been.
that is our intent. And I appreciate your presenting because you're right. The idea of going up against geology as you have does sound a bit crazy to those of us that have a good scientific base.
I understand. Yeah.
And the idea of that we should take Joseph Smith's word over the best studied word of our best scientists, um, in taking Joseph Smith's word about Montrose being Zarahemla. Uh, I dug for 25
Yeah.
summers in Nauvoo, got
Yeah.
pretty well acquainted with Joseph Smith and a bunch of mistakes. And having gotten personally involved in those, I
Yeah.
well, and Adamant for one. Mr. Jackson complained about getting the stones in his parcel of land where other people didn't get them. And Joseph explained to him, well, that's because it's Adam's altar. When Ray Matheny comes as an archaeologist, he finds that altar is actually only 1,000 years old. And so the conflict there, I mean, to me, the whole Adamant and the Amun story is a
Yeah.
preposterous mythology.
No, I understand that. I guess I'd look back kind of at the Council of Nicene, basically, where people all got together and decided the nature of God. And actually, this has to do with the science part too. But basically, the best minds of the time get together and they decide that God is everywhere and nowhere and without body parts and passions and dwells in your heart and fills the universe and everything else. If Joseph Smith was right, they were all wrong. And so I have to look at that and go, well, okay. But there's one other quick example, and that is that the idea that the Earth is a big ball of molten magma. Where did that come from? What is its origins? And it has to do with the Neptunists, the Plutonists, and the Vulcanists. And the Neptunists basically said, we think that the Earth is a big ball of water. And the Plutonist said, no, 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 no. Clearly it's a rock. And then the Vulcanist came along and said, clearly both of you guys don't know what you're talking about because there's these volcanoes that happen, and the interior of the Earth is obviously hotter than the outside of the Earth. It's spewing up hot stuff out of the top of it. And so the Vulcanists actually ended up winning the day, and the Neptunists and the Plutonists basically went away, and everybody kind of coalesced around the idea that the Earth is a big ball of molten magma. But that was back in the 1200s. We now have seismic tomography and we have drilled, up to 12 kilometers deep into the surface of the Earth. We know a lot more about the Earth than we did back then. And there's a lot to basically that now, I mean, 20 years ago when we were starting the universal model, if you said something about that there was water underneath the crust of the Earth, you'd have been laughed at. Today, it's accepted as scientific fact. Science constantly changes. It's constantly revamping, reviewing. If it's looking for truth, it's always going to be that way. God doesn't guess. God knows. So that's my feeling. Basically, if we stick with God, eventually mankind will catch up to what God already knows. But I think there's a lot of people who feel like, well, the gospel and the church and so forth, they'll eventually catch up to what science knows because science knows more than God. I'm definitely not in that camp.
We're running out of time. I do want to get one more question before you,
Yes.
relative to the United States and the towers that have fallen. You're talking about St. Paul's Cathedral being
Yeah.
miraculously spared. Um, it appears that you're giving a pretty serious indictment for the future of the United States.
Yeah. Well, I'm not per se, but the Lord says if you're watching for the signs that first off, he says he's going to give us signs. He says if you are watching for the signs, you won't be caught like a thief in the night, which kind of tells me that if you're looking for the signs, it's not going to be a big surprise when they happen. Then you look at the other signs about, well, some of that had to do with, I don't know if you know who Jonathan Cahn is. Probably most of you have heard of Jonathan Cahn, but that information came from Jonathan Cahn. I think he's an incredible guy. Holy cow, he's had some amazing stuff on the symbolism stuff, but he was dead wrong in 2015 when he predicted the massive meltdown of our economy, and it didn't happen. But he got the first two of them right. So, it's like all of us, we're all looking through a glass darkly, you know.
There was a question about the website that you mentioned. They were asking what that website address is.
Oh yes, yeah. Actually, I could put it up or whatever. I can show some stuff. Well, the website is just bookofmormonevidence.org. Now, the reason why I say that there's several because there's our primary website, and then we have our YouTube channel, which is called Book of Mormon Evidence, the channel, the YouTube channel. And we also have a streaming service where we have over 1,800 presentations from Jonathan Neville and Jim Lucas and 450 other experts in every field you can think of on the Book of Mormon, and even some you probably have never thought of before. Because some of these, I thought, oh my gosh, how did you guys figure this out? I think probably along the lines of what Blair Bryant was doing with the characters document. Somebody just gets focused on this thing and they figure something out, something that just goes triggers. There's something in their brain and they've been studying this for their whole life. They go, oh my gosh, look at this. And all of a sudden you've got all this new information that comes out. And so I feel blessed because we have these big expos and we get people and just like you, Paul, basically, they don't have to be active members of the Salt Lake Church. They don't have to have a recommend or whatever. They just have to have good, solid information that doesn't basically destroy faith. I mean, there are people who are out there trying to destroy faith too. So we don't let them come and they have other places they can have their voice. But basically, if they're faithful, we don't have a problem with it. We'd love to have you come out sometime and speak at our expo. Be awesome.
I'm afraid I would poke my elbows in some faith here and there.
You might.
I've gotten that
You might.
response from my attack on the swamps at Nauvoo.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it is kind of funny. I really think, and you can shoot me down if you don't like me this, okay? But I really think that kind of like Star Trek, they had what they call the Prime Directive. Remember, did you ever watch Star Trek? No? Okay. Well, anybody else watch Star Trek? Basically, they have this thing called the Prime Directive. Basically, they weren't to mess with other cultures and so forth. They had if they encountered other cultures, they couldn't give them extra technology or help them win wars or do that kind of stuff. They had to kind of stay out of it. I think that agency has probably got to be one of the most important things that God is subject to. I don't think God can mess with it. I think agency is something that is above God. I think God can influence, but I don't think He can take anyone's agency from them. Which means that everybody has the opportunity to examine everything and look at everything and figure out stuff for themselves as much as they can. He gives us some directions, some some guardrails, if you will. But I think that as members of our faith, that he gives us a lot of leeway.
Well, and I think it's important for us to understand that our faith has to grow.
Yeah.
We exercise it to give it a chance to grow. And the church restored by Joseph Smith 2 centuries ago is not necessarily fitted for the world we face today. There has to be growth in that faith to accommodate. Just like I think the Trinity was
Mhm.
a fine concept back during the in the days when the Earth was flat, but now you've got you've got the extra galaxies, hundreds and thousands of galaxies in sight.
Mhm.
The Trinity isn't big enough for that.
Mhm.
Really, you got to have a bigger concept of God. And so, for us to be able to recognize and attempt to embrace, although we are limited in our ability to embrace, to be able to
Yeah.
recognize that there are more dimensions than what we comprehend, and those dimensions are potentially part of the promise that the scriptures are giving us. So I really like the idea that we can somehow, in this relationship with the divine,
Mhm.
the response to embrace the divine promise. And I see that arc of history as toward peace.
Mhm.
Um, so I'd like to hope for and encourage faith for the arc of peace rather than the destruction, because while it may take some destruction to get there, I am confident in the prophecies that I understand to be that ultimately we are to be a people and place of peace.
Yeah, I don't think the New Jerusalem would be the New Jerusalem if it wasn't a place of peace. It said, in fact, it said it would be a refuge from the storm. But that kind of tells you there's going to be a storm too.
Well, another of the questions I was going to ask you relative to that, my
Yeah.
reading of the Book of Mormon says that the promised land is available to all people, and you just limited it to two. And therefore well, that's another argument for another hour, I guess. But
Well, I'm not sure if I understand. Limit to two, which people? Just the.
you've made the promised land in Israel and also in the Midwest.
Oh, yeah.
I read the Book of Mormon as saying the land of promise is a promise to all peoples of all times, and
Right.
therefore the call for people to be able to find the promised land of Zion is a call for eternity.
Yeah, I think that they'll be, at least to some extent, will be either physically brought to. There'll be a gathering. I mean, the laws of Moses talk a lot about, gathering, using the shofar to gather Israel and so forth, to gather them together. And I guess that I would look at it as that these two places are the place of gathering. They've been dispersed all over the earth for sure, but are they going to be gathered back together? And there's, I think, prophecies that discuss that.
Rainbow Eagle gave us a beautiful presentation showing that 2,000 years ago, the First Nations people gathered their stones and put them in a medicine wheel at the same place that Joseph Smith identified as the center place. It's interesting that not only
Yeah.
were the First Nations people coming together in that place for peace, but then Joseph Smith was advocating that would be a Zion, a place of peace. And then Harry Truman announced the United States would join the United Nations from the steps of the auditorium or at the edge of that same medicine wheel.
Yeah. Yeah, that area there is so sacred and so special, and I'm glad that we've got people that are overseeing it, taking care of it, making sure that nobody's building any big high rises or apartment complexes on it. So,
All right,
uh,
we're awfully close
a-
to 10
any
o'clock.
other questions?
Yeah, let me yield if there's any other questions or comments. And let me get back to you with an email shortly to get you scheduled for the next presentation. And so thank you very much for sharing with us tonight and taking on the questions and comments. And I'm sure there'll be a much more that'll be coming in the emails. But
Okay.
let me sing us off. O God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, our shelter from the stormy blast, and our eternal home. Before the hills in order stood, or earth received her frame, From everlasting thou art God, to endless years the same. 1,000 ages in your sight are like an evening gone, short as the watch that ends the night before the rising sun. O God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, be now our guide while life shall last, and our eternal home. Thank you all.
Beautiful.
Good night. May God bless you.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Thank you, Rod.
You bet.
Thanks, Rod. I was just at Adamonte on Wednesday of last week. I went there for the first time while I was down at Lamoni. And it was a beautiful spot. It was very warm, but it was a beautiful spot.
It used to be so covered with those trees with the huge thorns that you couldn't even hardly walk around in there.
Locusts.
Have you
Yeah,
been
those-
there lately?
I was there last year. I haven't been there this
Yeah.
year,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's you look at that and you go, wow, it's okay. It's hard to imagine how special that place must be when you just look at it. You know, it's just like, well, okay. But it's got a brilliant history, and it's got a pretty amazing future if the prophecies are correct, you know. So